101 horror books to read before you're murdered is for you. And who are you? You are a seasoned horror fan who is looking for maybe the B-sides of an album that you haven't found yet, or you're looking to just wrap your head around some definitions that some essayists in this book are going to cover for you, just to be entertained or to just kind of like encapsulate the last 20 years of horror. Or you are a brand new horror reader, you don't know where to start, you would love to get into horror, and you just need kind of a guidebook to walk you through and navigate such an explosive genre like horror that is just really off the hook right now. So you would want to pick this up and kind of use it as a map to guide your way through a very hot genre right now. Or you have been in it for some time, maybe like the last 10 years, and you want to know what has gone before that, back until like the early 2000s, and what to look forward to in the future. Maybe find a few new favorite authors and explore their back catalog, and then just kind of like enjoy reading about all of your favorite books that you've already read. I mean, that's one aspect of this book as well, is if you have read the book, it is kind of fun to hear from somebody else what they thought about it or how they sell it. And that will help you kind of sell it when you're talking to your friends. So I think there's really something for everyone in here. And it's from the perspective of like an ultimate fangirl who isn't pretentious about talking about horror. It's not going to be over your head. It's going to be like you're at a coffee shop with your best friend talking shit about books.
The first thing I wanted to go over was I had written out all these notes about the different types of things that are in this book, and my kind of comments about, what's nice about that and the way the format is. And then I was reading on the back of the book, because it's all like, it's the promo stuff. It's not like what the final back copy is going to be. It says, during promotions, we kindly ask that you help keep the book's features a secret by not sharing the full list. And then I was like, wait, that changes my entire approach to this conversation, because if we want to preserve like kind of the surprise of things, I have to be a little bit more careful maybe about the way we talk about things.
Yes, we should definitely protect the list, but I can talk about everything else surrounding it. So how I picked it and why I picked them and blah, blah, blah. Like we can totally talk about that, but like very specific books or like the 10 authors in their feature. Yeah, probably not.
Okay. Okay. So we're talking more in vague terms.
Yes.
General,
to avoid spoilers. Kind of, yeah.
Okay. That's helpful for me. Although I guess maybe I might end up talking about horror authors that I care about, and it's up to the listener to decide whether they're on this list or not, because
it'll be pretty clear.
Yeah. And I think that here's the thing. I think that one of the things I think is, well, first of all, when I found out you were making this book, I was like, good. Like, this is the type of thing so it makes me first think of Grady Hendrix's Paperbacks from Hell. And that's a real kind of snapshot of the past, whereas this is more kind of intentionally of a contemporary look at horror. So I'm assuming that this is due to like, we're looking at horror through your lens and what has touched you. Is that kind of what the idea was?
Yes, 100%. Yes.
And where did you have the idea, or did someone approach you and say, why haven't you done this yet?
Me. This was like not on my radar at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How did that go? Like, was it the Page Street Publishing, the people who did it, or?
Yeah. So basically, my editor, Alexandria, she approached me in an email through Nightworms and asked me if I was agented, and said, obviously this conversation, you can go ahead and just jump in with me, or like if you have an agent, we can pull them into it. But we just were wondering if you would be interested in this project. And they kind of detailed what they were looking for, what she was looking for specifically. She's a junior editor at Page Street. And I just kind of was intimidated by the entire idea at first. I was like, I don't know. So I told him I wanted to just kind of like think about it. And then, I mean, I already write like all these reviews for all of these books, and I read like 150 to 200 books a year. So I feel like I had kind of a knowledge base that I could go off of, and I could probably talk about horror books for a really long time. So I thought, this is possible. Like, with their framework and their ideas and the way that they want to execute it, I bet I could, you know, work through this. And then I said yes. So
So did they have a pretty solid vision of what they wanted it to look like, or did you have a lot of say of like the different elements of the book?
Alexandra had a vision for sure, but they really listened to me in terms of what I felt comfortable talking about. Which, when I was growing up reading horror, I definitely have like a very specific uh, context. I was reading a lot of what my mom already had. So I was reading like Agatha Christie and, you know, Dean Koontz and Peter Straub and Stephen King, and really didn't know anything about any kind of indie, um, authors or anything that was just kind of like off the radar a little bit. It was all like really mainstream horror. So I didn't feel comfortable going back into the analogs of history to do like a massive list. Plus, those are like very readily available on the internet.
Yeah.
Like, you can Google like a Rolling Stone style 500 list of books you have to read kind of thing, and get everything that goes all the way back to like Frankenstein and Dracula and stuff. So I didn't want to redo something. Plus, those kinds of classics would knock off other less noticeable books that I felt were really important to be on a list like this. They would just take up all the room, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. And even contemporarily, there are some conspicuous absences, like Stephen King, for example, isn't
Yeah.
mentioned. And like, I think in your introduction, you even say like, duh, Stephen King.
Yeah.
Um, but like that would really crowd the list, I think, too, if we were throwing those in the mix.
Plus, I would have to narrow down Stephen King's work, which I've never been good at in the first place. Like, my top 10 Stephen King books changes like periodically, seasonally, mood, like it just,
Yeah.
depending on the day that I make a list, whatever books will be on there. So there's no way that you could go through 65 novels of Stephen King and just be like, oh, I picked this one for a 101 list. Like, no, it's not going to
Yeah.
happen. But I sneak
Yeah.
them in a lot in this book.
That it is there's not even in a cheeky way, but just because like it's almost like when you have like a zombie movie and they don't say the word zombie, it's like, you fucking know what a zombie is. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like that. Like, if you have a
Yeah.
book like this and Stephen King doesn't come up somehow, it's like, we know you know who he is.
Well, and I just kind of assume that either people know who he is and they've chosen not to read his books, or they have and they didn't like it, or they already are like a huge fan. That's the assumption. Like, out of all of the authors in all of the world, I think there are relatively around like 10 that people can recognize like on the street, if we're really
Hmm.
honest with ourselves, because they're not like movie celebrities where you see their faces on TV all the time. They're behind the scenes, they're behind the books. So, if you saw Stephen King walking down the street, you would know who he is. There's only a few of those kinds of authors, I think, that totally not relative to their success, just recognizably who they are.
Hmm.
And so I think everybody knows he is a household name.
Right. Right. Yeah. And like, not even just as horror, but like as an American author, like
Yeah.
as like
Yeah.
he doesn't, it's he's that big. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. um, then I guess one of the first thoughts I had, especially when I was reading through, when you talk about like the books that are actually on the list, because if a book is on the list, you kind of give a quick summary of it. I don't want to say, it's more kind of like your response thing. It's not like a review saying this is XYZ. It's like, here are the elements of this book. And there's even like a handy little kind of code system that you have. So
Yeah.
is this drawn from existing stuff you wrote, or is this all fresh for the book?
Yeah, I my editor was very clear that this all needs to be original materials. Some of it, I think within maybe like a 10% frame was pulled from previous reviews and such, ways that I've talked about the book, because it's impossible to come up with a new way to talk about a book that I've talked about a lot of times. So many of the recommendations on this book I have actively promoted since, 2015, 17, in that range. So for me to talk about a book that I've been talking about for five,
Yeah.
7 years in a different way was challenging, but I also wanted it to be fresh for people who follow me on Bookstagram or Twitter or follow my reviews. Like, I'm not repeating myself. So I did, the extra legwork to make sure that there was a lot of original content in here. All the introductions to all the subgenres and then the larger genres is all original. Like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
all fresh.
And then based on that, do you feel like your voice to the reader of this book is different than your voice, um, how you usually talk about books, like either on social media or like with your posts about books on like Goodreads and stuff like that, or writing in
Uh,
publications?
Yeah, somebody commented about that. A friend of mine actually said, your the way that you review has evolved. Like, I think at first it used to be very fangirly cheerleading style. Like, I would write a review and it would just start off like, "Oh my fucking god, you like, or I would tweet about it like that too. I would just be like, "Oh shit, this book blew my mind." That's how I used to talk about horror. And I still have that same excitement, but I realize, like, in order to be palatable for like all audiences, I need to kind of explain more where the excitement is coming from and just be more articulate about my experience. And that takes a lot of practice and a lot of work. I think at first it's hard to know how to say that you love something, specifically when you're talking about one book. Like, what particularly did you love about this book? So I've had to, like, ask myself, okay, you love it and you want to shout about it, but what exactly do you want to say about this book? So I've really had to fine tune that.
Yeah. In my previous conversation with Philip Frakowski, my most recent episode, we got so into kind of the mechanics of storytelling and things that he did to effectively like have me as a reader, be invested in characters and stuff. And it got to
Yeah,
the point where, like, at some point he was like, "Hey, if you're reading this book, none of this matters. Like, this is just stuff that I do, but you don't have to think about this stuff while you're reading." And
right.
so what you were just saying made me think about, I think one of the things that I've always kind of fallen into when I'm talking about a book on a podcast or just telling someone about it is I get so caught up in all of the little things that make it the bigger good thing that I worry that I'm losing them and I'm not hitting the big point, which is like, um, it's entertaining. It paces well. Like, the characters are relatable, whatever. I don't hit those big points as much because I'm
Yeah.
like zeroing in. So is there something that you do to make sure that it really does get the bigger point across?
Yeah, so when you're having a conversation with someone, and I do this with people who kind of pop into my DMs on social media and ask me for a book recommendation, I feel like I need to know a little bit more information about what they're looking for. Like, they'll
Yeah.
just say, "Do you have any horror books that you can recommend?" Which, that is a very large topic. So yeah, exactly. So I just try to ask them more questions and try to narrow it down. Like, what's your favorite horror trope? Like, what kind of horror movies do you like to watch on TV? What do you watch at home? Like, I just try to get a general consensus of what they're already gravitating toward, and then I can point them in the right direction. But that's like more conversational. So, in the sense of like a book like this, I try to just consider that my audience is made up of like seasoned horror fans, people who are just trying it for the first time, people who've kind of been in and out of it. And I take that into consideration, and I try to like hit those points that maybe would come up while we're having a conversation. So that's why there's like a key sort
Mm-hmm.
of for each book, so that people can say, I love psychological horror. And you can go through this book and find like all the books that have the psychological horror emblem and know that that's going to hit something for you. Or, and you know, the where I got this idea of kind of breaking it down like that is from Novelist, which is part of your library. So if you have a library card and you look up your personal local library online, you can find like a menu that gives you resources, and then in the A to Z list, you can find under N Novelist, click it, log in with your specific library card that's is your identity to you, and sign in. And then you have access to this entire database of books, and then they have comps for the books that you're looking for. They've broken it down by like even region or location, like, oh, this book is set in, Hawaii, or this book is set in Georgia. So it's broken down in those ways that helps people narrow down the field, which is what I wanted to do in my book.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And I think that came up so we did a podcast episode, me and you and Becky Spratford for Lit Reactor, when I was doing that for a brief moment. And
Yeah.
that was something that we came up with, or came up in the conversation. And it's, to me, I think that anybody I mean, there's people that just read and read and read. And then, but I feel like once you start having conversations about books in one way or another, it kind of forces you to think about what a book is, like the components of a book more.
Yeah.
And then, so it almost kind of pushes you to do some of that categorization on your own. But then beyond that, knowing that there are resources like that are awesome, because when I was a much more casual reader, I had like the 5 authors I knew I liked, and then I didn't know how to go past that. So like if I knew about novelists then, who knows, like I would,
Right.
how much sooner I would have gotten to all of the amazing stuff that I love reading now. So yeah, that's an incredible resource that I think more people should know about, and just go to your fucking library in general, because if you don't, you're like doing yourself a disservice.
Yes, 100, like, shout out to Becky Spratford also, because she has taught me a lot about how to recommend books, and has really been instrumental in the way that I have geared my book response. I don't even call them a review anymore. I just call them a response, because a review is more like it puts in your mind like a critical kind of way to think about a book, and saying like yes or no to reading it, which that's not my vibe. Like, I would
Yeah.
never tell somebody not to read something. So librarians have this sort of like duty to the public, if you will. When the public asks them for book recommendations, they need to have on hand like sort of this catalog of things that they can say, and they would never deter a reader from something. And so that's how I've learned to approach reviewing. And I don't say like, I say this book was not for me. I'm comfortable saying that, but I
Right.
would never say this book is not worth your time, essentially.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I feel like even when I was like newer in reviewing, I tried not to just trash a book. If it wasn't for me, I
Yeah.
would say I feel like this is the kind of audience that would enjoy it. Like, and then
Yes.
that way at least I was not I was not putting a value judgment on the thing. I was just acknowledging that, like, not everybody's going to like your book, and
Yeah.
or not everybody's going to have the experience you hope your readers have with the book, and that's okay, because you have an audience. You're not going to get everybody or whatever.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that's I think that's something that has to come, I think, with time, though. Unless you set out from the beginning thinking I'm going to review in a certain way, I think that over time you come to the realization that you know um, like just straight up putting a value on a book, whether it's good or bad, just doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I mean, people, it's such a subjective thing. When we're reading, it's just so personal. And certain things are going to be turning one reader off, and it's going to be the thing that turns another reader on. And so that's really kind of the funny thing about writing a book like this, too, is I'm sure there's going to be so many people who are like, I can't believe like it's going to start off exactly like that. I can't believe that she didn't put X, Y, and Z on the list. Well, I mean, it's hilarious because we all have these massive TBRs and these toppling stacks of books to read. There is no way in hell I could read everything in order to consider it for a list like this. So that's one thing. I'm one person, my knowledge is limited. And secondly, I have an opinion, I have a taste, I have preferences, I have triggers, I have a whole set that is unique to me that is going to be wildly different than the next person. So the fun thing is being on Bookstagram, you realize that there are so many people out there in the world who are just like you. Like
Yeah.
down the line, you're going to say something, oh, I love this book. And you're going to get somebody to say, oh, I loved it too. And then after time, you realize we love the same book. So when you recommend something, I'm buying it. When I recommend something, you're buying it. Like
Yep.
that's what this is. This was born out of that kind of full, like relationship where there are readers out there who are just like you. They love what you love. And then there are readers who you're not compatible with at all.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
will, and this is an aside because what you just said made me think of it. Like you already acknowledged, you read a ton of books a year compared to the average person. You read the number you read, and that's fine. Um, but so in my mind, I, I start at there's no way that I'm ever going to read as much as Sadie does. I just don't read that many books. There's nothing wrong with that. But when I see that you're starting a book that I've read that I liked, I'm like, oh, she gets to get this experience. So you
Yeah.
just posted recently that you were going to read The Devil All the Time
Uh,
by Donald Ray Pollock. And I was like, and so that was one that was on my, I met Donald Ray Pollock back in like 2011 and I read his book back
wow.
then. And I was like, oh, she is in for a great experience. So I get that by, seeing the people I know reading things that I've read and loved. And I'm just like, oh, have so much fun. And so
Yes.
that
I
one for
mean,
specifically, I was really excited that you got to dive into that.
well, and we're mutuals on social media, right?
Yep.
So we see what each other, what's on deck. I even have that same response when I see a stranger in public reading a book that I enjoyed. Like, and I think that
Yeah.
that's the same for readers everywhere. It's like a universal love language. Like,
Yep.
you see somebody reading a book that you enjoyed, and you immediately want to go up to them and be like, "Let's talk about this book. Oh my gosh!" And that's kind of the community aspect of reading, in that we do experience it in kind of an isolated way. Like it's a very singular thing that we're doing reading, but we also want to jump on social media or Goodreads or whatever and just like share that experience with other people in the
Yep.
hopes that they can have that experience. Like the minute you said that title, The Devil All the Time, like I've only read 40 pages and I'm already as enthusiastic as you can be. This guy's writing is definitely something that appeals to me.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. He's great. It is a great
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
And actually, the movie adaptation is surprisingly good too. So, um,
And Tom
uh,
Holland's in it, I
and
think.
Tom Holland's in it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
always good.
I love him.
And then my other little indulgence is I noticed that you got a copy of Mother Howell by Craig Clevenger, and he's
Another.
like my brother. Like that
Yeah.
guy, we go back, and I love that guy. He was the guy who we had on to do the final episode of my original podcast, like to kind of
Yeah.
close it down. And but then when I saw that you owned it, and I was assuming probably you'd get around to reading it, my mind was like, she gets to see the fucking precision and like the craft work of this
Yeah.
man, and it's just it's so good. So that's
I'm
another one I was
so
excited about.
excited. Yeah, and that again is like the power of suggestion, because I love, Paul Tremblay's work. I love Stephen Graham Jones's work, and I was seeing that book pop up on their feeds,
Yeah.
and they were talking about it, so it made me want to get it. And then Clive like was so kind to ask if I wanted, an advanced copy, and I said yes. And then my dad was here over the weekend and I was telling him about it, so he went out and he bought it. And that is the viral power of
Yep.
just word of mouth, like excitement about a
Yep.
book, which is my favorite vibe in the history of the world. Like that is my favorite thing. I was born to do this shit. Like
Yeah.
because it gives me just like the when you're talking about a book and I know that I have it and I get to experience it for myself and you're so excited, that makes me excited. So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
the
and
best.
you got me fired up for reading Fever House by Keith Rawson.
Yeah.
By the thing that I don't do that you do is you do posts with your progress in a book, and so if I've read it, I'm like, oh, she's at this part. But if I
Yeah.
haven't, I'm like, wow, she's really selling this to me. So it is an effective way to. And I know we're way off the book right now, but
Oh no, this
this
is all
is
part of the book. This is all part of the
but
book.
this is kind of like the fundamental thing of it is
Yeah.
we're enthusiasts and we're touched by a book in a certain way, we're changed by the story we read and stuff, and we want other people to experience that as well. I think that with your book, the introduction I think sets such a great tone
Thank you.
because it feels very authentically you. It doesn't feel academic or stuffy or stuffed with purpose. It really felt
Yeah.
like you were just talking to me and saying like, "Hey, this is what this is about."
Yeah.
So I hope that's what you were going for because I
That
think
is, yes,
yeah,
that is
it really
totally,
sets a good tone.
that's how I like to talk about books, is conversationally, and I don't like to try to change that in order to put on a writer voice, and just, get into some other kind of style that doesn't feel like me. I really want it to be a feeling like if somebody picks this book up, they have a really good understanding of who I am as a reader, but also how I perceive books and talk about them to others. Like I didn't want to change that at all. My reviews are kind of that way too, like on Goodreads or published in magazines. I talk that way in Scream. Like I always preface my publishing platforms with like, is it okay if I cuss? Because I mean, I that's just who I am as a person. Like it would be weird for me to, and Amazon is so dumb. Like and when you try to review a book on Amazon and you can't say cuss words, and I'm sitting here editing myself saying, like a frig or effing instead of fuck, and it's just like what we're adults here. Like I mean, can I just talk like how I talk? So I don't try to put on airs or something that I'm not. Like I wasn't born to be a writer, I was born to be a reader, and now I just
Mhm.
want to talk about books.
And I love it. Yeah, I think it does set up first of all kind of like the voice will hear with the subsequent like sections and explanations of types of categories and stuff, but then also just like the way you talk about books. But that's how we talk about books. That's when you're talking to someone and you're like, oh my god, you have to listen to this. It's not like,
Yeah.
well, I believe based on these factors. You don't talk like that. You
No,
talk like you
hopefully not.
talk. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that was a good way to start out the book. But then really appreciated how it was broken up into some of the categories and stuff as well. So I'm assuming if it was me making this book, this would probably be the thing that would take time is figuring out what makes sense how to break it down, like how to break it down in a way that makes sense, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But then also what fits where and why. So was that
Yeah.
like a challenge for you?
Yes, it was such a challenge. I mean, just to peek behind the veil a little bit, I had to fight to have short story collections in this book.
Really?
Well, so when people say books, 101 horror books to read before you're murdered, some people will hear the word book and they will think novel. And for me, just being in the world of books, I know that books can be novels, they can be short story collections, they can be novellas, you know, anthologies. So I won't necessarily, the fight is the wrong word because they are very gracious in listening to me. I just had to preface this list with saying that some of these are going to be short story collections, and is that okay? I didn't want to go with anthologies because that brings in like a ton of different authors, which is like a
Yeah.
whole kind of different thing. But like, can it at least be singular author short story collections? And they said, within reason, like, can there at least just be like 10 or 12, but the rest be novels, or novellas? And I thought that that was fair, because I think that it's tough to categorize a short story collection. So I knew that that was going to be a
Right.
challenge because they're so eclectic in their tone and style and subgenre. So it was hard to, we tried to filter those in under like, supernatural or eco horror or what. We tried to do that at first. And some of those short story collections do kind of gravitate toward a certain subgenre, like cosmic. But at the end of the day, where you're like, let's just put them under short stories. It's so much easier just
Yeah.
to say, here's all the short stories.
That makes sense. Yeah. Because,
Yeah.
like, I just think about, I don't know why, but the first thing that came to mind was John F. D. Taft has a book called The End in All Beginnings. And
Yeah.
that's all over the map. Like, I would not, you
Yeah.
cannot categorize that into
No.
one like subgenre. There's one's literally on a foreign planet in the future or something. So, like,
Right.
yeah, that you couldn't put them all together. So,
Right. No,
yeah.
we tried. It was bad.
Yeah, that would be, I feel like the work for me would be, because then I'd want to test it and be like, is this the right place? Does it fit somewhere else? And like really, because then I would be like, I know people are going to challenge me if I got something wrong. So I don't want
Well,
to.
yes, and that's how I game the system a little bit with the categorization, like the little icons that are throughout the book to let people know, like, oh, this is psychological, or this is that, or this is because so many books fall under multiple categories that I didn't want to try to squeeze them into one subgenre and be like, that's all that this book is about. Like you brought up Fever House. Fever House is a complete mishmash of, crime and drama and apocalyptic and mystery and rock and roll. And I mean, it has so much going on in those pages that it would be, um, you know, kind of difficult to pigeonhole it into one subgenre.
Right.
So I was thankful that I had other ways to kind of identify the book for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. And actually, I didn't really think about that before, but having that little key with every book really does kind of, so like, it's like kind of a general grouping, and then when you're looking at the individual book, it's like, this is what this specific book is really about. So no,
Yes.
that's super helpful and really clever, so congratulations
Oh,
on that.
good. Yeah, because you know how sometimes you'll look at a book and be like, this is a haunted house book, but secondarily, it's also psychological, or secondarily, it's also, a mystery, or it's a cosmic haunted house. So I wanted to like, yeah, filter it into its proper category at large, and then in general, and then also have, yeah, these like subways to kind of categorize it, because that's how we look at things when we're in the store. Like you pull a book off the shelf, you flip it over, you look at it. I like totally scan for keywords. I see ghost,
Yeah.
I see gothic, I see some certain buzzwords, and I know what, or I'm pretty sure I know what I'm getting into.
And it's really, now that we're talking about this, I go back to, because I just talked to Philip Fracassi about Boys in the Valley, and I literally started the conversation talking about possession stories, and he immediately pushed back, saying that he didn't think it was specifically a possession story. And then we had a whole conversation about it, and then, like, we kind of came around to the idea that the real thing is that there's like an evil influence. So, like, he was trying to be ambiguous about it, and then we were talking about your book, and it's in the like demonic possession kind of situation, and he's like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said all this stuff.
Yes, I mean, if I'm going to share that book with people, there are certain buzzwords that sell a book, like you said. And there are fans who gravitate towards something regardless of what it is. You have like your vampire junkies, you have people who will read anything to do with witches, you will have people who, like, the scariest thing for them is demon possession. That's one of mine.
Yeah.
And if you tell someone this has demon possession elements in it, it's an insta buy. And
Right.
That's why, there are, so whether or not an author like agrees or not with the categorization of their book, I think I know how to sell it to other readers in the sense that like it has these elements and I know that people are looking exactly for that. So
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And then, but then, because then there's so many subtleties to it. So the first thing I think of is, so if I was going to recommend Boys in the Valley to someone, I'd think, okay, did you like Head Full of Ghosts? Did you like, Come Closer or whatever? But
yeah.
then I would also be like, did you read the latest Grady Hendrix? Because like, the whole like, was it Pupkin
Yeah, pumpkin.
situation? Like, if you were into the Pupkin element, like, there's something there that,
Yeah.
there's a vein that's similar in this book. So, you like, regardless of what the author wants, like if the idea is connecting someone to something that they're going to react positively to, yeah, I think that's the goal. That's the goal. Yeah.
Yes, that's been like a new element to my reviews this year that I've included. I have a template now for every review that I write. So I just kind of go through a template, which helps me to be articulate about the finer points of a book. But I do comps now because I feel like there are vibes that I get that are not necessarily like apple for apple style comps, but they're more like a vibe. So, like for Boys in the Valley, I would appeal to people who enjoyed reading The Name of the Rose. Uh, um, I forget the author is oof, forgot that one. But if you saw the movie with like Sean Connery, and then if it's this whole like isolated abbey type
Hmm.
of situation. Like if you like that, then this has that kind of element where you have this like isolated home for boys, this like orphanage, and that's going to appeal to somebody immediately.
Yep.
Like immediately. Like we all love those like coming of age, like religious trauma, like boys trying to be boys but are being like oppressed. You know what I mean? Like a Lord of the
Right.
Flies style thing. Yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
comps are helpful.
um, yeah. I actually, in the later years of Booked, the podcast, I ended up, when I was reviewing something, I had just a rubric where it was like 8 different elements to a story, and I would, instead of just trying to talk about a book based on what I remembered and my impressions of it, where I was like, what was this element of the story like? Was this strong? Was it not something that was as well represented? And I went off of that, and I found that it made it more rich, like more like useful, maybe, to talk about
Yeah.
a book that way. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It also helps me to avoid spoilers because I feel like a lot of times people talk about books very, very spoilery. If
Yeah.
it's not on the back of a book, like you probably shouldn't mention it, is kind of my rule of thumb. Um, because I just read a review in a very prolific newspaper and it said something that wasn't on the back of the book or part of the synopsis, and it is a bit of a reader discovery spoiler. Like that's the fun part about, there's actually one too for a new Rachel Harrison book coming up too, where
Oh
I
yeah.
just tell everyone just don't fucking read the reviews because people are ruining the best part. And I
Hmm.
went into it blind, and when I got to the reveal, to this like reader discovery, I felt like, oh, Rachel, you got me, like
Right.
you got me. And I feel like there's so many subtleties that can be spoiled by people just oversharing. Like, just don't overshare
Yeah.
plot details and keep it real to like experience. Oh, I felt scared, or this gave me anxiety. Like, talking points that are more about your personal reading experience versus like plot details is like
Yeah.
really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I know what review you're talking about, and I was just agonizing over
Very
that.
disappointing.
Yeah. Switching gears just a little bit. One of the things that, another thing that, so I just liked all of the elements of the book, so I don't have to keep saying I liked this, I like this.
Yes, thank
Um,
you.
but want to talk about, there are some really, um, I want to say maybe passionate guest essays, I guess, is kind of the way that I put it. So in throughout the book, and I don't want to spoil who does them unless you do, but there are these guest essays, and typically they're talking about horror in general or their particular like strengths or whatever within horror, and that was really cool too, because again, it's kind of reinforcing um, like why we're here, why we're having a conversation. So I really enjoyed that part of the book too, because it breaks up just like I'm reading about a book, I'm reading about a book, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh wait, this is why I should be excited about this whole pile of books.
Yeah, there were messages that I felt were important to convey to people who would be picking up this book, that I felt were important to say, but I didn't want to say them. I think that there are hugely talented people in the horror writing community that have a lot to say based on personal experience, that could share those things better than I could. And so I did ask, would it be possible if we could have people talking about things that I feel is important but don't want to necessarily write myself? And they loved the idea. And when they pitched it to the bigger people involved in this project, they actually told us that we could even invite more people. So at first it was just like, could we have one or two people? And then it snowballed into the 5 essayists that we have. And all of the essays bring something super unique and powerful and informative to the conversation that I think is just a huge asset to the book. I don't think the book would be even anywhere near as informative as it is if those essays weren't in there. I think they're extremely important to the body of the book itself.
And they all really just went for it. Like
Yes.
it's not like it's like, oh, I'm writing a little thing about why horror makes me happy or whatever. It's like I'm talking about my identity, and this is like the
Yes.
most important thing to me. Like they really went deep on it in a way that I wasn't expecting.
Yes, I love it. I'm so glad you brought that up. It was when there were certain essays, well, really with all of them, I was completely blown away. They nailed the assignment. Nobody had to go back and do anything. The only thing that was asked of them from the editors was we did have to try to fit each essay onto like its given section. So there was like a few word counts that had to be compromised, but nobody edited voice or anything that just felt super important. Like we really made sure that those essays, as they were told, are the way that they are represented in the book. Um, like, when I first started out, there's so many things that you learn from other people that you wouldn't necessarily learn if you were just bumping around by yourself picking up books. Like everything that I've learned that is of any value is because I've, listening to people talk about their personal experience in the book industry and then also as like readers. And I think it's just extremely important while we're reading to also hear those perspectives, those unique perspectives that just give a little bit of extra insight into how to respond to these books. Like, when you're reading When the Reckoning Comes, you don't want to look at it with, any kind of your own narrow vision. You want to be able to take the whole scope of the knowledge behind that book and the experience behind that book and what is Latoya McQueen saying, like here, like what Latanya, excuse me. What is the overarching reason that this book is in existence? I think that's really important. I think we
Yep.
do just kind of enter into a consumer driven way of reading books sometimes. Like if you're on TikTok, people buy these large hauls and then, these books just linger on shelves without being read, and people feel pressure to read all of these books. But it's not a competition, it's not just consumption. It's like, what are these books saying to us? Like, what are they important? Why are they here? Like, why did the author write it? I think those are all like really important questions, which the essays answer too.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and that immediately makes me think of talking to Alma Katsu about the fervor,
Yeah.
and how she's definitely evolved into her historical horror books kind of blatantly being commentary on things that are happening in modern
Yes.
society. So, like the Japanese internment camp story being fundamental to the fervor is a huge commentary on, anti-Asian situations because of the pandemic and everything like that. So um, the book is great on its own.
Yes.
Understanding her cultural lens on that, and why it was important for her to tell the story makes the book better. So understanding the storytellers and the community informs and makes the reading experience can inform and make the reading experience. I think sometimes people just write to be entertaining, and that's completely fine.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
having a bigger context, I think, is helpful for appreciating the stuff you're reading.
Yeah, especially in the genre of horror. I mean, horror is such like a visceral, personal thing, and we experience that emotion all the time, just living in this world. So with all these different storytellers telling stories and having these like social commentaries and personal asides and things that they want to say through their characters or about their characters, it's important for us to gain context like you're saying. And that's not to say that like you have to go out and listen to all the interviews and podcasts. I mean it's already hard enough to get through like our TBRs, not to mention like, trying to do like a deep dive on every single one of them. But
Right.
if you just have a general knowledge, just even reading like the end pages is where I like to tell people like, if you don't have time to listen to interviews or, whatever, that's one thing. But read the acknowledgments, read the author's notes, read the beginning the beginning matter, if there's a introduction or whatever. It does give some bare bones, some essentials that could give a perspective to the book you're actually reading.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the thing that came up, the thing I thought of while you were just saying that, kind of before the point you were making, was my girlfriend just randomly, I was talking to her one day, and she's like, every day in a woman's life is horror. And
Yeah.
I was like, yeah. So, but there's so much that a woman goes through that, is horrible or whatever. That, yeah, like, that's just something that I didn't really think about before, being not a woman, but
Yeah, that's
just
so
having a open perspective, more open perspective, does kind of change the way you think about things.
yes, 100%. Like, I mean, women in general, like, I mean, just telling stories of like motherhood and birth and just being a woman in this world. Like, I was watching a Black Mirror episode. I think it was Demon 76, so it was like the 5th episode of the 6th season. And my husband, what the girl is like trying to unlock a door and she's fidgeting around with her keys and there's kind of some sketchy people over here. And my husband was just turned to me and he was like, I can't believe like women have to just go through this life as like jittery, scared little rabbits, sometimes like that sucks. And I was like, yeah, that's why we fucking write and read horror and we're addicted to true crime. I mean, it's all homework for us, it's all of us talking about our trauma and then learning about trauma so that we can avoid it. That's like our whole thing.
Yeah, homework or validation, right? Like, oh,
Yes.
other people have this experience too. This is,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I'm definitely not qualified to talk about that. But that, when my girlfriend said that, it was just so succinct and so
Yeah.
like unavoidably true, that I was like, oh man, I have this privilege that I have to, you know, think about.
It's so cool that like, we can all read these horror books from different perspectives and really gain a lot of insight, and just kind of sit back with it and listen to it and receive
Hmm.
it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Cool.
I one of the reasons that I do this though is because I like to dig deeper. I like to talk to the author and see like what inspired things and stuff. And I got kind of hooked on that when I was back doing reviews and just talking to another. Here's the thing: you don't have to do a podcast. You don't have to interview the author. If you talk to another person about a book you read, that's going to enrich your experience of reading that book.
Yeah.
So, um, or I guess going on a forum or going on social media and seeing what other people's reactions are to a book, I feel enriches your experience of having read that book. So, um, that's pretty easy, and it doesn't take. You don't have to listen to every podcast interview with the author, like you said, but it's still seeing shared experience. I think is definitely important.
Yeah, and one thing I like to do when I'm writing a review or talking about a book is sometimes I will go and read the polar opposite opinions on Goodreads. 5-star reviews are really helpful in getting me excited about talking about what I also loved. And then reading the 1-star reviews helps me to think critically about my own feelings, because sometimes I have blind spots when it comes to like a favorite author. And so if I'm hearing the same kind of criticism over and over again about a book or about an author, I can really think about that and think like, am I, not seeing that because I've become so accustomed to the way this person is telling the story? And if it's something that I'm receiving and need to think about and look for in later works, I take that on. But if it's something that I feel strongly opposed to what they're saying, I like to kind of integrate that, not singling those reviews out, obviously, but just
Right.
digesting it and then letting it inform how I'm going to talk about those same issues. Like a lot of criticism about certain authors will be like, I just, I can't get what the way this person tells a story, or like, the beats are off for me or whatever. And then I like to kind of digest that and talk about that in my review. Well, so I've heard it said that blah, 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 and the way that I like to think about this is maybe listen to the author read their own work. It kind of helps with those choppy sentences that you're talking about, because this is the way the person actually reads their work, is with those beats.
Yep.
And so I find that that's helpful, is to read the 5s and the 1s. Sometimes the 3s are really good too, because those are really honest. The 3s are the most honest reviews, in my opinion, because they're saying, hey, I liked it enough to not give it a 2 or a 1, which I feel like are, the poor side of the scale. And I didn't love it as much to give it a 4 or 5, but here's what I liked about it and what I didn't. The 3s are great. I love to spend time in the
Yeah.
3s. I don't
Um,
use stars, but I
no,
like to
yeah.
read them.
Yeah, and I just thought about one of the things when you're talking about um, seeing what common objections are. I feel like, and I don't know if it's happening so much now, but Chuck Wendig used to get just nailed all the time for like the way his sentences were structured, or the way that he, like, there was kind of like a staccato way that he wrote
Yeah.
that bothered people. And like after seeing that enough times, I was kind of aware of it when I was reading his stuff, and I was like, okay, maybe, but I don't care. Like, it's still like really
I
entertaining.
know.
So
I know. He's the one that spoiled me for short chapters. Like I tell him that all the time. Like going through the Miriam Black series, which is I think 7 books, so you really get immersed in those short chapters where like you turn the page and there's just like 2 sentences on it and you turn his
yeah,
chapter the next chapter. I fucking love that stuff now. Like
yeah,
I get into a chapter that's over 25 pages and I'm like, come on,
yep,
where am I going to put a bookmark in? Like I'm tired.
yep, yep. No, I hear you.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, he's like right up here. There we go. There you are,
Yeah. The
Miriam.
Chuck section.
All right. So one of the other things about the book is author spotlights. So without necessarily naming authors, the spotlights is an interesting thing, because instead of just calling out an individual book on as part of the list, this is an author where it's like, here is a bigger look at this specific author and their body of work. So in my mind, I'm thinking this came from like in my, if it was me, I'm not choosing one book of this specific author that's on the list, so I'm guessing that's where that came from, like a little
Yeah.
cheat to be able to talk like a little greater length. But at the same time, the cool thing about that is like, um, probably these are people that are a little bit more recognized anyway. And so there is a bigger conversation to be had about them, maybe. So am I on the money with that, or pretty close?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few that I chose them because I feel like they are a little bit lesser known and need a pump up, because when I discovered their work, and I'm thinking of someone particularly on the 10 spot, but I'm not going to say, but when I first read the first book of this particular author, I was actually pissed that nobody had told me to pick up this person's book before. Like I very much accused the people around me, as in like, if you have read this book and you didn't tell me to read this book, like fuck you guys.
Yeah.
Like I was legitimately annoyed that I hadn't heard of this person, so I kind of made it like a little mission to read their entire back catalog and I'm still currently doing that because the person has a lot of books, but I want to talk about that in a way that will make it so that now those people who've read my book can't say that nobody told them, like I
That's
don't want
cool.
them to feel that way.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's great. And I feel like, well, and then within the actual list of 101 horror books, it's not just all the names you'd expect either. Like um, there are some people who are lesser known or lesser talked about. So that's pretty consistent, I'd say.
Yeah, and they're not exactly on social media either. Like, I didn't want this to be a Twitter writer list because, I feel like if there are readers out there who are on social media, you're pretty much aware of the people who are on there and are talking quite a bit for themselves, and people are talking about them. But there are authors out there who are choosing not to be on social media, and word of mouth is such like a powerful thing. I don't think that that should stop people from blowing their stuff up and talking about it openly and widely, because that's part of the canon of horror as well, even though that person isn't out there promoting their own in the traditional sense of the word with social media. Other people can do that for them. So I've sort of adopted certain authors and that aren't present and try to elevate that out there, try to like
Mm.
amplify, because their work is really good, and I'm hoping that it's abundantly clear that there are authors who are not participating in the larger conversation online, and then there's tons of readers out there too, and we need to reach them. They're not online. Also, running my business Nightworms has taught me that there are tons of readers out there who are not getting recommendations online. Like,
Yeah.
they pick up their Nightworm subscription, and that's the first time they've ever heard of some of those books and authors is what they get delivered to their door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, yeah, so you make another good point, which is just like signal boosting people in general. Because there's so many around. Like this person is Stephen Graham Jones for because I've started the first time I read a Stephen Graham Jones book was in I want to say 2011, and so there was a good 6-7 years where I was like, this is the most criminally underappreciated author
Yeah.
that exists, and
Yeah.
so at any chance I had, I would recommend his books, and I would talk about him all the time on my podcast. Thankfully, there's some momentum there now, and so Stephen Graham Jones, um, he still like deserves to be talked about because it's not like he's just because he's more well recognized we can just shut up about him. But there are people like that who I'm thinking if people just read the book, they'd see it, they'd understand. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're so tunnel minded about our own pet genre that we think these major players, these big authors or whatever, quote unquote, in our space, like, don't need the extra promotion or are widely known. That is horseshit. Like, that's the whole reason why I'm going to like BoucherCon in San Diego in August, is to go to this thriller con, because I guarantee you when I wear my Jade Daniels shirt, people are going to ask me about this because they haven't heard of it. Like, there we think that everything, the horn has been tooted. I'm here to tell you, no one has tooted like, you can always toot the horn of your favorite author because there's tons of people who have like fucking Adam Neville, one of my favorite authors. Every single time I post about him on Instagram, without fail, I will have at least 5 to 10 people be like, where should I start? This is the first time I've ever
Yep.
heard about him. He has movies on Netflix.
Right.
Paul Tremblay has a blockbuster movie out in the world, and still people will ask me about where should start. Like, it is not in any stretch of the imagination. These are like big authors. Tons of them have second jobs because they're not full-time writers yet,
Yep. Yep.
even though they're published and publish something like once or twice a year even, like, you can still talk about these authors. That it's important to, amplify and boost the signal and keep talking about it. Like the work is never done
Yeah.
if
Yep.
you're passionate about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's the ones where there's the people I always talk about, and like, Craig Clevenger's one of them, because I've never read, so like, this is just me being passionate about him, but the closest I've gotten to someone's like writing craft being so like precise and perfect and like well honed is like, did you read Shadow of the Wind, Carlos
Oh
Ruiz
yes,
Zafon?
yes.
Like,
Carlos
yeah,
Ruiz Zafon, or
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is right there. Like, it's that level of craftsmanship. Like, if you ever read Clevenger's Contortionist Handbook, you'd be like, I don't think I've ever actually read a book before today, because it's so well written and so
Wow.
just, and it's got that kind of effortlessness where it's
Yeah.
like you overlook maybe that it took so much work to make it feel so effortless, and so that's kind of like the Clevenger
Yes.
thing. But so I'll always shove his books on everybody, because like, it's an experience where you're like, I see.
I love that. I mean, that is how we become fans of anything. I mean, I attribute my horror passion to my mom, who
Hmm.
was recommending horror to me when I was super young. That's where I get my music taste, what my parents were listening to in the car. Like, it's exposure to things. And so being on Bookstagram and being exposed to all these different readers who are consuming all these different things that they're passionate about and talking about. And then you get on TikTok and you have like a younger audience along with some older people too, but I mean generally there's some younger people on there who are discovering books that we read, a long time ago. They're just now discovering it, and it is such a joy to watch them be like, have you read,
Yeah.
Shadow of the Wind? Oh, it's so good, blah blah blah. And now that's going to inform their preferences for all of these new books that are coming out. They're going to be like, oh, that's like, you know,
Yep.
I'm that old. Okay. I'm 47. Like, it's like in a grandma style way. I like really love the fact that there are kids out there who are experiencing old books for the first time, because there's not an expiration date on these books. So even though I'm reading a lot of new titles per year, I make time for something like, The Devil All the Time,
Yep.
because that's not a new book, but it's new to me, and I'm going to preach it from the rooftops. I can already tell. So,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
powerful thing.
And that's great. Like, I feel like if you do kind of tunnel down into a one specific type of book, you're limiting yourself. So, it is nice to kind of like step out and do something different.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things that, having been paying close attention to books now for, I don't know, 12 or 13, good Lord, it's just, it's so long now.
Yeah.
I love seeing a super fan pop up. Like, the best example I can think of off the top of my head is, Greg Green,
Yeah,
who
I love
is,
Greg.
um, for people who don't know, he's, this massive Stephen Graham Jones enthusiast.
And Laird
And
Barron. He's a huge
and
Laird Barron junkie.
yeah, I was about to like,
Yeah.
beyond that as well. Like, he has great taste and I think he's a big fan of Nathan Ballengrid too. And like,
Yes.
he has great tastes, but he has this kind of drive to, he's like a collector. He's got this like drive, and so he finally just recently completed his Stephen Graham Jones collection, which is not an easy task, because
Right.
like I said, Jones was so underappreciated in the like 2010s that everything that he published back then is out of print. So it's
Yes.
like, you got to find it somehow. And thankfully, I've got a stack of Jones right here where there's some stuff where I'm like, I could get hundreds of dollars for these. And but like, seeing this person who I remember when I first saw him, he was asking about, hey, what other stories should I read? And he was just kind of like feeling out like, hey, I found this new author I really like. Where do I go from here? And me and my friend Jesse were like, just feeding and feeding. Like, we know what to do. We know how, like, what to
Yeah.
recommend. And like, seeing that grow into this, like, level of appreciation. And then him being now a resource for other people and spreading the word and stuff, and having those kind of dedicated readers who want to get the word out, I think is great to see. Like over time, watching these like kind of castles of fandom build is really cool.
I love that you said that because I think when I was a little bit younger, I used to have this like sort of snobbiness when it would come to like a pet favorite band of mine that was kind of off the radar. I would actually secretly resent the fact that like people were listening to them or like getting into them, or you would hear like their song on the radio or in a movie and you're like, God damn it, like that was my jam and it was mine alone and I feel super possessive about it. Like now I'm not even going to listen to this band. I'm going to move on to some other like very alt band. But now I again, this all comes with age because we mature hopefully as we grow up. Um Now it is so much fun to turn people on to pet favorites and to be like, you know, watching them even exceed what your library looks like
Yep.
because Greg's out there running down, you know, copies that don't even exist. And it's like really, really cool. I love super fans. I love these like dedicated bookshelves. Like he's creating these like curated dedicated bookshelves. Another one is Book Monster.
I was going to mention him, but
Yeah,
I
with
was
his
trying to remember his actual name.
George.
George. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, with his Paul Tremblay fandom and
Yeah.
literally any he has quite a few pet favorite authors where, you know, he's making these like dedicated shelves. And it's really cool and it's also kind of speaks to I won't say the popularity of a certain author, but it speaks to the hmm I would say it speaks to more of like the fandom and how like personal it is like to a person because we can all love like an author and all of us like rally around that author and be like, yes, we love it, we love it. But some people, it's highly personal for them. They have found a
Yeah.
message in there that really resonates with them, and that's a special thing. um you know, I'm sure authors are extremely flattered when they see somebody go whole hog like that. And
Yeah.
I love to be educated too. There's so many rabbit trails of like where these authors have published like originally like short stories in like magazines that are available for free. And I love that they pass that on to other people. Like, did you read this little short, you know, freebie or this or that? It's great.
Yeah.
It's a community thing.
It is, and that makes me think about one thing that I've thought about with because you've seen it over the years where it's like either if you're like a real dedicated listener to a podcast and you listen to them all the time, eventually you'll hear them say like, someone reached out to me and said this got me through my cancer journey or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, there is that kind of like personal connection that you can't anticipate, like you can't create your content in a way knowing this is going to reach a person. And I boiled it down in my mind to the kind of idea that like the need finds the art. Like
Mm-hmm.
you, as a person who's consuming something, the connection happens when it does. There's no way that you can kind of predict it or force it. Like the connection just happens. So the best thing you can do is just keep consuming and finding new things, because that's going to open up the possibility of these like deeper connections to happen. So,
Yeah.
um, and then again, that goes back to making sure that we're recommending things to people and making sure that people know about it, which is 100%, you know, what this is all about. And,
Yeah.
but also very necessary because, another example of something that I would think would be a no brainer. So I'm a huge fan of the book, The Raw Shark Texts. And yeah, if you're familiar with it,
What did you say?
The Raw Shark Texts
I haven't
by
read that.
Stephen Hall. Okay, so
Yeah.
it came out in like the late 2000s, like 2007 or something. And one of my favorite books ever, probably my second favorite book ever. I own like 11 different copies of the book.
What?
They're all like right here. They're all like British first edition, Canadian first edition, US
Cool.
first edition, signed copies, whatever. Um, and he went about 14 years between publishing that book and his new book coming out in 2021. And I had told so many people about this book, made a ton of people read the book. Um, and then, so when the new book came out called Maxwell's Demon, I did it on the podcast and I was social media all over about it because I was so excited that this book was finally here. And I can't tell you how many people were like, I didn't even know he had a book coming out,
Yeah.
who really loved that first book. And so, yeah, we have to talk about it.
Yes.
We can't assume that because I knew about it, everybody knows about it.
Yeah, that is so important because, like I said, I was so mad that I read this amazing book that kind of blew my mind. No one had told me, and it had been out for like a really long time. And when I talked to the author later, just to thank them for even just writing the book because it was so special, they relayed to me that, like, yeah, when it first came out, it kind of, didn't go anywhere. And it was only due to a resurgence, like on Reddit and different people like Buddy reading it and talking about it on Bookstagram, that it saw another life, which,
Yeah.
can you just imagine? Like, I like to personify things. So can you just like give an anthropomorphic vision to books, like sitting on a shelf, being totally neglected when they first came out, and then 20 years later, people are reading it and they're just like, oh, people
Yeah.
do love me. I am good. Like, that's so validating to a book and to an author. Is, like I said, there's no expiration date. So, it's so cool to revisit those back titles of your favorite authors instead of just anticipating and waiting for the next one, which you're going to buy on the day it comes out and then not read for 2 years. You
Yeah.
should definitely just like go back into their back catalog and catch up, like read some of that old stuff. It's also very insightful into where the voice is going in the future, I
Yeah.
feel like I read
Absolutely.
some old Stephen Graham Jones and I was like, I did not know he had that voice in him. Like, there is some dark shit that man put out early on, and
Yeah.
not that it isn't now, and it's more refined, but I
So you're
mean,
talking about The Least of My Scars.
I am talking about wow. I also read his short story collection After the Pupil Lights Have Gone Off, which there's some really dark ones in there too. Um, Solve for X is
Yeah.
something that will live in my brain in perpetuity. So,
Yeah.
yes.
um, we haven't talked about the list yet. So probably kind of what I would like to wrap it up on is
Yeah.
we're not going to talk about what's on the list,
Yeah.
but I'm going to give you a little bit of trivia. I
Ooh.
checked off all the books I've read on this list of
Yeah.
101 books,
Yeah.
and I was really devastated. I'm ashamed of myself because I've read 14 of them.
Oh, on the 101?
Yeah, of the 101. I was
That's
really
a
ashamed of myself.
that's kind of a source of pride for me, actually, because then I can just be like, yes, like this is the success. Like, I want people to be like, now I have things I want to read.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, the upside of it is there's so many really quality recommendations now that I know I can go in a specific direction. The other thing I noticed about when I was looking at the list was like, oh, I read a bunch in this particular category,
Oh.
but none in this category. So
Oh.
it would actually give me a way to challenge myself to kind of read outside of my normal kind of boundaries. Because if I haven't read anything in where the creepy kids books are talked about, then maybe I
Yeah.
need to tap into that a little bit. So,
Yeah, and Creepy
uh,
Kids is one of my favorite, which also the Boys in the Valley could fit under Creepy Kids.
100%, absolutely it could. So have you gotten any kind of early reader talking about like how they did on the list and stuff like that?
You're the first person to mention
Okay.
that, actually. I mean, my editor really was probably the OG person to say that she is building out her TBR according to what's on the list. She wants to really grab some, and then there was some early buzz from Fangoria's podcast, The Color of Dark, and they talked about, well, now I'm adding some books to my list, and that's really just all I want. I
Yeah.
just want to open people's eyes the way that my eyes were open when I was just reading a bunch of, like traditionally published books from very well known authors. And then I discovered a few, and it's really hard to pinpoint exactly which book is responsible for the big blowout moment. It was either a Jonathan Jans or a Christy DeMeester or Anya Alborn. Those are the three that I kind of read early on, especially Anya. I was like, oh, there are women who are telling very good horror stories out
Mm-hmm.
here. And I was just kind of in this like, is Anne Rice the only one type of
Yeah.
thing? And then when I discovered, tradition like indie and self-published authors, it just blew the lid off of horror for me. So that's kind of what I'm hoping is that people will pick this book up and be like, there is so much more outside of what I'm seeing on Barnes and Noble bookshelves that I could pick
Yes.
up and enjoy.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is a nice challenge or a path or a suggestion or whatever you want to say to like move forward. I will say though, I made it up pretty significantly in the author spotlight
Yeah.
side of things.
Yeah.
With the author spotlights, I think probably about 45 books I've read of from the people in the author spotlight. So it's like, okay, so I feel a little better about myself.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Um, and then, so that was my self-soothing, like, okay, you're not brand new to horror, buddy. You've read a bunch of stuff, but like, again, now this says you need to branch out. You need to find the other voices, the new voices. And actually, now that I think of it, it would have been 13 before I read Boys in the Valley just recently. So, yeah, I definitely have some work to do. But it's again, that's in the spirit of why you did the whole thing.
Yeah, and I also just invite people too. Like I'm pretty sure I mentioned it somewhere in the back in the horror junkies thing. Like I am on social media, so if people want to, tag me as they're reading along and, oh, this book was recommended in this book, I read it, I really liked it, or I didn't particularly like it, is there something else that's sort of like it I could read? Like I welcome any and all of those kinds of comments, because I really love talking about books and recommending books to people. Also, just like buddy reading with people is really fun.
Yeah,
There's a few books in here that I highlighted would make like a good buddy read. Like I think something like Come Closer or A Head Full of Ghosts that has endings. I'm thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. Like just something that will provoke long, open ended conversations about what exactly happened according
yeah.
to the individual reader. Because I think some people come away with very strong conclusions, and I think some people are just kind of like, I want to hear what other people have to say before I decide on how I think that went?
That's a good point. And I think that especially with Paul's work, because he does work a lot of ambiguity into a lot of his
Yeah.
stories, talking about books that have that kind of like some things are up to interpretation with another person who might have seen it a different way helps shape kind of your overall impression of what the story was. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I like arguing about those things too. I think like debating it, like if you're really brave, you can go on Reddit. Reddit people are really passionate and kind of like
Yeah.
strong-willed about certain things, but there are some fun conversations about books on there.
I get annoying about it though sometimes because I I kind of look at storytelling sometimes as like you're establishing rules and pay or you're doing a setup and a payoff kind of situation. So like when I'm reading through a story and there's something later in the book that's like, well, I don't know how to interpret this. I'll be like, well, at this point and this point, this happened, and this established that when this happens, that's what this
Yeah,
means. And they're like,
yeah.
all right. Like it gets a little bit, I get a little bit like process. I get into the process of it, and I get really picky and detailed, and
I
sometimes that
think
takes the
that
fun out
that's
of it.
cool. Yeah, no, I think that's cool. I know a lot of people like you. Like I'm kind of the person who gets in the back seat and lets the author drive. I've told that to people a lot of times. I'm not out there solving thrillers. Like there are so many people who post like, "Oh, I saw the ending coming," or "I saw the plot twist," and I'm like, I didn't. I didn't
Yeah,
see anything coming at all. I mean, movies are a different story. I can predict movies pretty well, but because the music and everything like tells me the
yeah.
smoking guns are more obvious, but like I can't figure shit out at all. So I really let the author do the driving, and then I love talking to people who break down the mechanics and the plot holes and the story elements. Like I love having those conversations with people because I'm like, oh, that really unlocks the whole thing for me.
That's what I do. I feel like as I'm reading through a book, it's almost like, I don't know if you ever watch like poker or anything. I don't, but like I've seen how like when a poker hand is happening and there's like three players, it tells you what percentage like chance they have
Oh,
of winning
yeah,
the
I have
hand.
seen that. Yeah,
Like in
Texas
my
Hold'em.
mind, like it's these three things could happen, and this is the percent possibility that like this is going to be the outcome. Is like kind of the way that my mind works until like
Wow.
one gets eliminated, and I'm like, okay, well either this or this is going to happen, and
Wow. Yeah,
you know,
that's a whole way of reading that is
yeah.
like totally foreign to me. So if
But
I
then,
ever have any questions about a book I know you've read, like I am coming to you.
yeah, but then like Josh Malerman comes along with Inspection and just completely just blows my mind with like one tiny chapter toward the end of the book, and I'm like, well,
Yes.
no one could have fucking seen that coming. So
Yes, Josh Ballerman's good at that.
so before we wrap it up, is there anything maybe that I left out that is important to say about the book? Oh, I mean, I guess it's out August 8th, I believe, right? August
Yeah,
8th?
the book is out August 8th. The publisher is Page Street Publishing. This is really their first out with something like this, something very niche. I think that they're used to doing like cookbooks and craft books and specialty books, and this is kind of the first genre focused nonfiction book that they've put out. So, kind of check them out. They're really cool. And also, you can find me on social media. I am doing very poorly on TikTok. I've not gotten the hang of it. And I'm on Twitter and I'm on Bookstagram. So, and I'm under the Mother Horror Sadie Hartmann handle. You can find me easily.
You have been, since I discovered you sometime in the last few years, just like the example of what an enthusiast should be. And
Oh, wow.
I think that you are a huge asset to horror and horror authors. And um, yeah, just really appreciate your voice and all you do to elevate the work, these amazing, and it's just the right time. Like it's so, I was having a conversation with Josh Malerman back in 2017 or 18, and I was like, man, all the horror books that are coming out this year are just insane. I haven't seen it like this before. And he's like,
Yes.
we're in a moment. We are in a
Yes.
moment. And that moment has just gotten more big. And I didn't expect it to be just continuously growing. So, but when that happens, there does need to be kind of shepherds that point the way. And you're definitely one of them. So thank you for your contribution to the horror world and for this book as being a big part of it.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your kind words. I really take that to heart. And thank you for having me on the show. Thank you for being my first like big interview about 101 horror books. So I appreciate you inviting me on your show. It's always like fun to have some podcasts that I can recommend for people to, pursue and to be on. And I had a really wonderful time here. So